In the early hours of a crisp autumn morning in 2024, the world awoke to a headline that would reshape the geopolitical landscape for decades to come. Ukraine had won its war against Russia. The conflict, which had begun in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea and escalated into full-scale invasion in 2022, had finally reached its conclusion. The implications of this victory were profound, not just for Ukraine and Russia, but for the entire global order. To understand how this outcome came to pass and what it meant for the future, we must examine the key factors that led to Ukraine's triumph, the immediate consequences of Russia's defeat, and the long-term shifts in international relations that followed. The path to Ukrainian victory was neither swift nor inevitable. It was the result of a combination of military innovation, unwavering Western support, and strategic miscalculations by the Kremlin. From the outset, Ukraine faced an opponent with vastly superior numbers in troops, artillery, and air power. However, Russia's initial advantages were undermined by poor logistics, low morale among conscripted soldiers, and a failure to adapt to modern warfare. Ukraine, on the other hand, leveraged its highly motivated defense forces, real-time intelligence from Western allies, and a decentralized command structure that allowed for rapid decision-making on the battlefield. The use of drones, both for reconnaissance and precision strikes, became a defining feature of the war, giving Ukrainian forces an edge in targeting Russian supply lines and command centers. Crucially, the West's sustained military and financial aid played a decisive role. The United States and European Union, recognizing the stakes of a Russian victory, provided Ukraine with advanced weaponry, including long-range missiles, armored vehicles, and air defense systems. This support was not without controversy. Some nations hesitated, fearing escalation, but the collective resolve to prevent Russian expansionism ultimately prevailed. The economic sanctions imposed on Russia further weakened its ability to sustain the war effort, crippling its access to critical technologies and financial resources. By 2024, the tide had turned irrevocably. Ukrainian forces, bolstered by a steady stream of Western arms and intelligence, launched a series of successful counteroffensives that recaptured key territories in the east and south. The liberation of Kherson and the encirclement of Russian forces in Donetsk marked the beginning of the end. As Ukrainian troops advanced, Russian morale collapsed. Reports of mutinies and desertions spread, and even among the elite units, fatigue and disillusionment set in. The Kremlin, facing mounting domestic unrest and a faltering economy, found itself in an untenable position. The final blow came when Ukrainian forces, in a daring operation, severed the land bridge connecting Russia to Crimea, cutting off supply routes to the occupied peninsula. With its forces in disarray and no clear path to victory, Moscow was forced to the negotiating table. The terms of surrender were harsh. Russia would withdraw all troops from Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, and recognize Ukraine's sovereignty within its internationally recognized borders. Additionally, Russia would be required to pay reparations for the destruction caused during the war and submit to international oversight to prevent future aggression. The immediate aftermath of the war was a period of reckoning for Russia. The defeat shattered the myth of Russian military invincibility and exposed the weaknesses of Putin's regime. Protests erupted across the country, with citizens demanding accountability for the war's failures and the economic hardship that followed. The Russian economy, already strained by years of sanctions, faced further isolation as Western nations moved to permanently reduce their dependence on Russian energy. The ruble plummeted and foreign investment dried up, leaving the country in a state of prolonged stagnation. For Ukraine, victory brought both relief and immense challenges. The country was left with the daunting task of rebuilding its devastated infrastructure and economy. Millions of displaced citizens needed to be rehoused, and the scars of war, both physical and psychological, would take generations to heal. However, the war had also forged a new national identity, one defined by resilience and unity. Ukraine's successful defense against a larger aggressor cemented its place in the Western alliance, and talks of NATO membership, once a distant possibility, now seemed inevitable. The European Union, recognizing Ukraine's strategic importance, fast-tracked its accession process, offering a path to economic recovery and long-term security. The geopolitical ramifications of Ukraine's victory extended far beyond Eastern Europe. In the United States, the war's outcome reinforced the belief in the necessity of maintaining a strong military presence in Europe. NATO, which had been questioned by some as outdated, emerged stronger than ever, with new members joining and existing members increasing their defense spending. The alliance's credibility was restored, and the message to other potential aggressors, particularly China, was clear. Territorial expansion would not be tolerated. China, which had maintained a cautious neutrality during the war, found itself in a delicate position. While it had not openly supported Russia, it had also refrained from condemning the invasion, hoping to benefit from a weakened West. However, Russia's defeat forced Beijing to recalibrate its strategy. The failure of a major power to achieve its territorial ambitions through force made China more cautious in its approach to Taiwan. The prospect of a similar Western-backed defense in the event of a Chinese invasion became a significant deterrent, leading to a period of diplomatic engagement rather than military escalation. In the Middle East, the war's outcome had mixed effects. Some authoritarian regimes, which had relied on Russian support, found themselves vulnerable. Syria, for instance, faced increased pressure to negotiate with opposition forces as Russian backing waned. Meanwhile, Iran, which had supplied drones to Russia, saw its influence in the region diminish as its primary ally retreated from the global stage. Turkey, which had played a balancing act between NATO and Russia, now found itself more firmly aligned with the West, further isolating Russia in the Black Sea region. The war also had profound implications for global energy markets. Europe's rapid shift away from Russian oil and gas accelerated the transition to renewable energy sources. The urgency of energy independence led to significant investments in wind, solar, and nuclear power, reducing the continent's reliance on fossil fuels. This shift, in turn, weakened the leverage of petrostates like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, forcing them to diversify their economies or risk long-term decline. On the technological front, the war had demonstrated the critical role of innovation in modern warfare. Drones, cyber warfare, and AI-driven logistics became central to military strategy, prompting nations to invest heavily in these areas. The private sector, particularly in the United States and Europe, saw a surge in defense-related research and development, further widening the technological gap between Western powers and their adversaries. The cultural and psychological impact of Ukraine's victory was equally significant. The war had been a battle not just for territory, but for the idea of democracy itself. Ukraine's resistance became a symbol of defiance against authoritarianism, inspiring movements in other countries facing oppression. The narrative of a smaller nation defeating a larger aggressor resonated globally, reinforcing the belief that justice and determination could prevail over brute force. However, the war's end did not bring an immediate peace. Russia, humiliated and economically crippled, remained a volatile actor. The Kremlin, now led by a new generation of leaders, sought to rebuild its influence through asymmetric means: cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and support for separatist movements in other countries. The risk of a resurgent Russia, driven by revenge rather than ideology, loomed large. NATO and its allies had to remain vigilant, ensuring that the lessons of the war were not forgotten. For Ukraine, the post-war period was one of both hope and hardship. The country's reconstruction became a global effort, with nations from around the world contributing to the rebuilding of cities, schools, and hospitals. The Ukrainian people, who had endured years of suffering, now looked toward a future where their country could thrive as a sovereign, democratic state. The war had forged a generation of leaders, both in government and civil society, who were determined to prevent history from repeating itself. In the broader historical context, Ukraine's victory marked a turning point in the 21st century. It demonstrated that the post-Cold War era, characterized by the assumption of Western dominance, was not over. Instead, it showed that the principles of sovereignty, self-determination, and collective security could still prevail against aggression. The war also underscored the importance of alliances in an increasingly multipolar world. Nations that had once been hesitant to confront authoritarian regimes now recognized the necessity of standing together. As the years passed, the memory of the war shaped global politics in ways that were both predictable and unexpected. The European Union, strengthened by Ukraine's membership, became a more cohesive and assertive bloc. The United States, while still grappling with internal divisions, reaffirmed its commitment to global leadership, particularly in the face of rising challenges from China. The United Nations, often criticized for its ineffectiveness, saw a resurgence in relevance as nations sought to strengthen international law and prevent future conflicts. For Russia, the war's legacy was one of decline. The country, once a superpower, found itself relegated to the status of a regional power, its ambitions curtailed by its own failures. The Russian people, who had long been subjected to state propaganda, began to question the narratives they had been fed. The seeds of democratic change, though fragile, were planted in the aftermath of defeat. In the end, Ukraine's victory was not just a military triumph, but a reaffirmation of the values that underpin the modern world order. It proved that even in an era of shifting power dynamics, the principles of freedom, sovereignty, and collective defense could still prevail. The war had been a test of resolve, and the world had passed, though not without cost. The lessons learned would shape the future, ensuring that the sacrifices made were not in vain. As the sun set on the battlefields of Ukraine, a new dawn emerged, one where the boundaries of possibility had been redrawn, and the world, though forever changed, moved forward with cautious optimism.